Aha! Thank you. It's good to know that I'm heard, because when I tried this out earlier, it wasn't working. So, today I'm going to tell two stories from the early days of Asgard. You know, when you're in a new house and you're trying to work it out, then you have to stretch and you have to explore. And in another place, I've told the story of the creation of the world according to the Vikings. And it involves a tree, and it involves a giant who's so big that his skull becomes the sky. But I'm not going to tell that story today. And in other places, I've told more about the tree and all the worlds that are hanging in the tree. But I'm not going to tell that story today. Today, I'm going to start with a story of, Odin. That's it. Odin, sometimes described as the chief of the gods, but yeah, Frey may have something to say about that. And another of the gods called Honir. Now, Honir sort of fades into the background a bit. Some stories say he was there at the beginning of things. Other stories, well, he just drifts away. And in one story, he goes as a hostage to the land of the Vanir, but because he can never make a decision about anything, he gets forgotten about. So that's Odin and Honir. And who else should be in the story? The one who always gets the laughs, the one who is known for mischief, sometimes known as Sleipnir's father, or the snake's father. Who do you think that could be? Hey? Well, with a cheeky grin, it could only be Loki. And this story starts with Honir and Odin and Loki going a-wandering, going on an adventure, and finding out about the land they called Midgard. And as they were exploring through Midgard, they came to the edges of Midgard, where it comes close to Jotunheim, the land of the Jotun, the giants. Forces beyond even the ken of the Aesir. There's a bit of a war between them, a bit of friction, but yeah, this is early days. So Odin and Honir and Loki are out for a walk, and they walked an awful long way. And after you've been on a long walk, well, you feel hungry, but they hadn't really brought any food with them. They did have spears though, and grazing on the hillside near them, Loki spotted some cattle. So, quick as a flash, Odin pulled out his spear and threw it, and they had a cow, killed, skinned, gutted, and chopped up, all ready for roasting in minutes. Loki, who was particularly good with fire, had dug a pit and had been heating up rocks and stones to make them red hot so they glowed, so the meat could be put down on the stones. Fire was there, so it would all sizzle and fry and cook. They were so hungry, and they looked, can you feel your tummy rumbling? And they looked at this meat ready to eat. But, well, when they prodded it after a bit of time, like maybe they prodded it with a knife, that would be a good thing to prod it with. Instead of the meat slicing nicely like a good steak, blood came out of it. It was raw as the moment it had been put in the fire. That wasn't very normal. It was, in fact, distinctly odd. And when they waited even longer and the rock oven they'd made wasn't working, then they got really suspicious, and Odin started looking around. Loki started looking around. And then they had this horrible, ominous feeling. And looking behind them, they saw on a treetop the biggest eagle you've ever seen. Its wings spread eagled, larger than the side of a pub. And they looked up, and the eagle looked back at them with a cold eye and said, "Your meat will never cook." "Why is that?" they cried out. "Why won't the meat cook?" "It won't cook unless you give me a share of it." Well, all of them were so hungry by now that they would say almost anything to get the meat to cook, and said, "Yeah, sure, you can have a share of the meat, no problem." And at that, the bird took the spell off the meat, and the meat started to cook. Oh, and the smells were really wafting into their faces now, and they were really, really hungry. And Eagle looked down, and just at the right time, when the meat was ready, the bird gave a nod. The god said, yes, of course, we made a deal, you can have the first selection. And the bird swooped down and grabbed all the best bits in its claws and flew over to a bit away and started pecking and eating away at it. The gods were furious. They were left with like bits of bone and the really, really grotty little bits that you don't really like and sometimes leave on the edge of your plate. So Loki grabbed the stick that was lying there and went to hit the eagle as hard as he could. But, well, instead of the stick doing what a stick should, the stick stuck, and Loki stuck to the stick. So if Loki stuck to the stick, the bird took off, and Loki was stuck hanging off a bird as the bird was flying. Boom, boom, ha! Can you flap your wings? Ha! And he flew above the trees, and he flew above the mountains, and then he dove down past the mountains with Loki scraping himself off the rocks down to the trees. That tree came just a little bit too close. And then flew out to the sea and dragged Loki through the sea, and then flew back up towards the mountains again, as if he was going to bash Loki off the biggest, sharpest boulder he could find. At which Loki shouted, no, no, mercy, mercy! And the eagle landed, and from the magic, it left the stick, and Loki was no longer stuck to the stick. The stick was no longer a sticky thing. Maybe it was a twig. And the bird, at that point, revealed itself as a Jotun, a giant, a shape-changing giant, a daughter of wolves, and said to Loki, well, you're at my mercy now, aren't you? And Loki said, yes, yes, anything. Just, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm battered, I'm bruised. What do I need to do to save myself? And the eagle said, well, it's funny you should ask that. What you need to do to save yourself is promise on your honour, make an oath to bring Idun of the golden apples to me, because those apples are special. Which Loki said, oh, is that all? Sure, no problem. Betray my friends? No problem. Do anything to save my skin? No problem. I'll get Idun to you. Just take me back and give me a reason to give to my friends so that they don't think, they don't get suspicious. The eagle said, just say that the cattle was mine and I was a bit cross because they'd stolen it. Loki thought, oh, okay, that's fair enough. So the eagle flew Loki back to the camp and dropped him off. The gods ate the rest of the food that it wasn't much of, and Loki made his excuses, and they all went back to Asgard. And time went on a bit, and Loki just let everything quieten down for a while until the suspicion would be completely off it. And then one day, when Idun was serving apples to all the gods, Loki happened to mention that, well, he'd seen another tree like Idun's apple trees in the forest, and it had even nicer apples on it, at which Idun was really surprised. Idun said, these apples, they were given to me by the earth herself. There is no other tree like this. There is no other tree which produces fruit that keeps you young. And Loki said, oh, well, I must be wrong, but can you come with me and we can check it out tomorrow? And Idun carried on handing out the apples, but agreed that tomorrow they would go for a walk. Next day, they crossed over the Rainbow Bridge, down, 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 leaving Asgard to explore. And as they wandered around, Loki took her into the woods, saying, oh, it must be the next clearing, or just a little bit further, until the sun was blackened by the wings of a giant eagle that swooped down and grabbed Idun and flew away, and we all know who that eagle was. Loki returned to Asgard, and time passed again. But when the time to eat the apples of Idun came, there was no Idun, and there was no apples. And the gods, they started to age. Their beards grew grey. Their bones became achy. And Odin thought, well, I should really find out what's going on. But, well, his mind was going a bit, and he was getting a bit of Alzheimer's, so he kept forgetting. Until one day it got so bad that Thor, the mightiest and strongest of all the gods, really couldn't get out of bed. And Odin, in a moment of crisis, remembered, right, something's gone wrong. Who will it be? I know! It'll be Loki! And he sent off for Loki. And Loki was summoned. Loki was summoned and threatened. And with the threats, Loki confessed and told the whole story about the eagle. So Odin said, right, well, it was your mistake. You're going to fix it. Loki asked Freya a favour, to borrow a feather, a feathered cloak, because Freya had a cloak that when you wore it would turn you into a falcon. And with that cloak, Loki turned into a falcon and flew off. Straight towards Jotunheim, straight towards the castle of Thazzi. And reaching the house, he found that Idun had been locked in a tiny room at the back of the house. But in falcon form, he was able to get through a small window and see Idun there. And turning back into Loki form, he told Idun that he'd been sent to rescue her. And Idun didn't know that the eagle had been sent by Loki, didn't know anything, was just pleased to be able to get out of that horrid hole. And Thazzi had gone away fishing for a bit, so she'd got a bit of peace and quiet, but she wanted to leave. But how are they going to get out the window? Loki used some of his magic this time. He transformed Idun and her apples into a hazelnut, and turning back into a falcon himself with his cloak, he grabbed hold of the hazelnut and took off and started flying. But Thazzi, the great sea eagle, wasn't far away, and saw the falcon leaving, and guessed what had happened, and started to follow, beating his wings like thunder. Loki flapped fast as a falcon can fly. The eagle beat its wings behind, causing a storm, and the clouds came from Jotunheim as the little falcon flapped as fast as it could all the way back towards Asgard. The eagle, beating the air behind, started to catch up. It was getting close. It was getting neck and neck. Loki spotted that the gods had started to build a fire next to the walls of Asgard. All of the wood piled up from everywhere, ready to be lit and to burst into a giant conflagration. That means a big fire. The falcon went straight through, straight over the fire, and Loki landed, tumbling, changing himself and Idun back as he did. But when the eagle crossed over the walls of Asgard, the eagle got caught up in a massive gout of flame and fire as the gods kindled the bonfire. The flames caught the feathers, and the feathers caught the air, and Thazzi disappeared into a massive burst of smoke. And maybe if you look out now, you can see his eyes sparkling in the sky as it's black. And Loki lay on the ground, unnoticed, because the gods, getting over all of their old age and aching bones, crawled towards Idun and where her apples were lying on the ground. And that was the sweetest, finest apples any of them had ever tasted. Well, so that is the end of that story, but I've got a wee bit of time left. Thank you very much, Mary. Your compliment is greatly appreciated. I was wondering what other story I could tell. And all around me I've got things from Viking life. I've got blowing horns. But things people find most interesting usually are things like swords. And seeing as how it is Tuesday, Tiersdag, I thought I might tell a wee quick short story about Tyr. Just to finish off. Do you know who Tyr is? Tyr is known as a warrior god, the bravest of the Aesir. And this story shows his courage, and perhaps it would be a reason every Tuesday, Tiersdag, to remember courage and to think about how you could be courageous in your life. But to the story. Loki, See, it's going to be a good story. It's got Loki in it already. Loki had a beautiful wife, and a very devoted wife. But Loki also was uncontrollable, and he had a girlfriend. And with his girlfriend, who was a Jotun, he had 3 children. The first of these children was a snake, a worm. But not any worm that you could put in a box. This worm was thrown by Odin into the sea and grew to be so big that it wrapped round the world of Midgard and bit its tail. Another of his gods was called Hela, and, well, she was a beautiful woman from the waist up, but blue, cold, dead rotting from the waist down. So Odin gave her the command of Hel, Helheim, to the whole of a whole area to rule over, and she would share her food with the dead. And they would eat off of a plate called Hunger with a knife called Famine. Yeah, his kids, they weren't really the cutest and fluffiest kids in the world. Except that was the little puppy. Everyone loves a puppy, don't they? And this little puppy, well, it was just a wolf. And really, all dogs are wolves, aren't they? And Odin thought, well, just a wolf. It can grow up in Asgard. After all, we need good hunting dogs. And he gave it to Tyr as a pet to look after. And Tyr looked after the wolf very well. And the wolf gets called Fenris, or Fenrir. And they would play, and Tyr would throw things, and Fenris would go and fetch it and bring it back. Except this was an unusual wolf, the child of Loki, an Aesir, and a Jotun giantess. So what started off as throwing balls ended up to throwing cows' heads, ended up to throwing whole live animals, and the wolf would come back with it. And, well, the wolf got hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. And you know how sometimes you say, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse? Well, Fenris would eat a whole horse for starters, and then come back for more. And the gods got a little bit worried about all of this. And, well, as Fenris grew bigger and bigger and bigger, they started to worry that maybe not only would Fenris eat them out of house and home, but would eat them as well, all of them, nom 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 nom, with its pointy teeth. So they thought they needed to do something. They needed to train it on a lead. So they got a big iron chain, solid, so big that it was hard for 2 of them to carry it. And they brought it along. And as they got close to Fenris, Fenris looked at this chain and said, what are you trying to do here then? And the god said, we've got a game for you. We know you're big and strong. We want to see if you can break your way out of this chain. And Fenris went, sniffed it. I can break myself out of that. Go on. So they bound Fenris up in the big iron chain. And then Fenris stretched. And Fenris shrugged. And Fenris shivered harder. And the chain sprung and broke into many, many shards of flying metal. And Fenris went, that was a good game. Here, tickle me behind my ear, thanks. And ate another couple of cows. The gods thought, well, we need to do something more than this. We need to do something better. And Odin thought and consulted, and they sent off to the dwarves. And the dwarves knew how to work metal. But more than knowing how to work metal, they also knew how to draw things out of reality and bind them to substance and make magical things. So they returned to Odin with a chain that was like a silk cord. And Odin looked at it and went, that's never going to work. Did you see the size of the chain we made? The dwarves said, you're missing the point here. We've taken the sound a cat makes when it walks, the breath of a fish, the roots of mountains, the beards of women, and we've put them all into this chain. And Honir looked and went, huh? But Cats don't make noise when they walk. Women don't have beards. Has anyone seen the roots of a mountain, or even the breath of fish? And the dwarves sighed. Honir, you can't see them because they're in the chain. Oh, said Honir. Ah, said Odin. And carrying this chain, well, this silken cord, they went up to Fenris again. Fenris looked at the chain, and when they introduced the game this time, he was a little cautious. Where is the honour for me if I break a chain that looks like a cord, he said. This reeks of magic. Are you trying to trick me? At which point Tyr stepped forward, the bravest of all the gods, and said, This is no trick. I will give you... my word, it is not a trick. I'll give you a promise. And Fenris said, Okay, put your sword hand in my mouth. And then if it's a trick, I'll have my revenge. If it's not a trick, you'll be no worry. You won't be worried about this at all, will you? So Tyr did that. He put his fist into Fenris's mouth, and the other gods, they bound Fenris up really tight so he couldn't escape with the silken cord. Fenris shrugged and shook and stretched, and the cord didn't budge. And then he really put some effort into it and stretched and shook and budged, and the cord still didn't break. And the gods cheered and they celebrated because they'd made a chain that not even Fenris could break free from. And they took the end of the chain and they tied it through a stone at the roots of the world. So Fenris remained bound at the roots of the world, shrugging and shrugging and trying to escape from the chain with great force and rumbling. And that's sometimes why maybe you get earthquakes around the place. And the gods were happy and they cheered. All except one god. Do you remember the surety, the protection, the promise that had been made? Tyr, with one hand short, he was left to the end of time. But being a good warrior, he could fight with his left hand. Probably. Well, the test of that would come at Ragnarok, the battle at the end of time, the twilight of the gods, when Fenris the wolf, having had a bit of a taste, having been hand-fed, shall we say, would come back for the rest of the meal, and there would be a battle between Tyr and Fenris, and the gods and the Jotun, and everything else. But that's the end of this for today, and the end of that story. Tomorrow I think I'll do some crafts. So you'll need some cardboard, some scissors, some pen. I'll put a notice on the page so that you can know exactly what you need, and I'll work out making a Viking toy, I think. And then on Sunday I'm back again and I'll tell some stories of saints. And then hopefully next week more Vikings, and it'll go like that. But if you want to have any requests, please get in touch, let me know, and I'll see what I can do. Just if